The Saints Row franchise is mostly a game series that hasn't taken itself too seriously in how each game is presented, and over the years, there's no denying that the Saints Row series has kind of played off of Grand Theft Auto and always tried to be an alternative to Grand Theft Auto. And while it might not have been as rich in features, with each new installment of Grand Theft Auto really pushing the boundaries of gaming overall, Saints Row kind of went a different direction and offered a more comedic narrative and kind of a more over-the-top experience. But now we're in 2018, almost 2019, and the future of gaming is starting to reveal what is coming in the near future. With the PlayStation 5 on the horizon and whatever the next Xbox thing is going to be, Saints Row might be at a very large turning point, especially with what has happened in the last year. If you didn't know this already, earlier this year, Deep Silver, the developers of the Saints Row games, recently had been reacquired by THQ Nordic, which marks the first time that both Deep Silver and the Saints Row franchise are back under the ownership of THQ since THQ's original bankruptcy a few years back. Now, when Deep Silver was reacquired, we didn't know for sure if it'd be possible to see anything out of the Saints Row franchise. I mean, we saw some Saints Row games a few years back, which were okay, but at the same time, the franchise had been mostly dead for a pretty long time. And if you look at Saints Row and its history and where Saints Row kind of filled the gaps in the market during different release cycles of other games that are similar, particularly Grand Theft Auto, we can actually see a trend that suggests that it might be time Saints Row finally comes back. Okay, so let's inspect the franchise just a little bit closer. Back in 2006, just 1 year after the release of the Xbox 360, Saints Row came out, and while the game definitely had a comedic narrative, a lot of the selling points of the game and the reason the game was successful and sold a lot of units was because at the time there was no other open world game that has that Grand Theft Auto feel on the market yet. Grand Theft Auto 4 was still 2 years away and wasn't going to release for a while, so Saints Row kind of capitalized on that market of players who wanted that open world shooter driving game that wasn't available yet. And Saints Row was that game that filled the market and got a lot of sales just for that one reason, that it was like Grand Theft Auto. Of course, players at the time fell in love with it because of the funny narrative and it's the things that made the game stand apart from Grand Theft Auto, but initially when people first took interest in the game, that was a real big reason why people took a look at it. However, before Saints Row 1 even released, the team decided to begin development on the sequel, Saints Row 2, which they knew was going to have to compete head-to-head with what Rockstar was doing with Grand Theft Auto 4. While it's speculated that they tried to get Saints Row 2 out a little bit before Grand Theft Auto's release in April of 2008, it didn't look like they were able to make that deadline just quite, and Saints Row 2 ended up releasing in October of 2008. However, while Saints Row 1 really was at its core more of a Grand Theft Auto clone, Saints Row 2 kind of took things in a different direction. As Deep Silver realized that Grand Theft Auto 4 was shaping up to be more and more of a realistic type game, they decided to make their game a little bit more on the comedic side and more focus on the funny parts of Saints Row 1 and kind of exaggerate it. And this really is what created the essence of what Saints Row 2 is. It's the over-the-top gameplay matched with a hilariously funny comedic story that, of course, still has some heart in it too. So during the period of time where Saints Row 2 and Grand Theft Auto 4 were both promoting their games, Saints Row made it a point in commercials and trailers and other types of expos showing off the games to show off some of the crazy parts of the game that players would be able to do. And they really overhauled the city of Stillwater to make the city familiar for players who played Saints Row 1, but also kind of compete a little bit with Grand Theft Auto. While the graphics didn't look as good, the gameplay was completely something else. And Saints Row 2, while it didn't blow up in sales initially, it definitely had the replay ability that Grand Theft Auto 4 didn't quite have as much, and a lot of players kind of fell into this game down the road, and it definitely gained its own cult status over time. With nothing coming out from Rockstar for quite some time, and Saints Row 2 really doing well in sales over a longer longer period of time, Deep Silver was greenlit to go ahead and work on Saints Row the Third, which came out in a year where nothing came out from Rockstar remotely close. They were competing with LA Noire at best, and Saints Row 3rd brought a ton of new players into the series and really polished the things that worked so well in Saints Row 2 and kind of brought the game series into the newer generations and enhanced the graphics and just made the game look overall significantly better. However, the same year before Saints Row 3's release, Grand Theft Auto 5 was announced, and it would come down to another close competition to get the next game out before GTA 5 would finally release. And with Saints Row 3 really only coming out in 2011, they really had less than 2 years to begin development on a sequel to that game, and Saints Row 4 was a product of that sequel, which essentially took the game that was Saints Row 3 and gave players the freedom and flexibility to have superpowers and fly through a simulation. And with each Saints Row game, we saw the story kind of get bigger and bolder, starting out as just a small gangster story to a larger city takeover to essentially, with Saints Row 4, we have a presidential attack and superpowers and space aliens, and they kind of jumped the shark a little bit, but the game was polished enough where it worked. They reused a ton of Saints Row 3 assets, and it was really clear, but at the same time, they were trying to get a game out clearly before Grand Theft Auto 5 would come out, and at the same time, Saints Row 4 definitely went the approach of advertising the complete over-the-top gameplay. Instead of having to run around and explore a city that way, you could just fly and run up walls, and it was actually a really good superhero game. Not necessarily a Saints Row game, it didn't feel like a Saints Row game, but the writing was still really strong, and the game definitely had fun gameplay that was cool. And obviously you can see they were competing with Grand Theft Auto, as this game just released literally a month before Grand Theft Auto 5. However, when Grand Theft Auto 5 released in 2013 on the Xbox 360 and PS3, and later on re-released on the Xbox One, PS4, and PC, Grand Theft Auto has completely taken the world by storm. And while the whole issues with Deep Silver and THQ had already occurred, making it a little bit harder for another Saints Row game to come out, there really wasn't any room in the market for another game to be like Grand Theft Auto that wasn't better or pushing the boundaries of Grand Theft Auto. And that's why the Saints Row franchise has kind of grown stagnant over the past 5-6 years. If they were going to have any chance of having a game sell well, it would either have to push the boundaries of Grand Theft Auto or do something completely different. And they already tried to do something completely different with Saints Row 4 or the Gat Out of Hell expansion. The franchise has kind of seen everything that it could possibly see. Until now. This year at E3, we saw a lot of talks about the future of Sony and Xbox. And of course, we didn't see any official announcements, but we know that they're looking towards the future at this point. And they're wrapping up the end times of this current generation of hardware. And while we don't know exactly what Rockstar's roadmap is, it wouldn't be too surprising that we won't see another game for at least a couple of years. Red Dead Redemption just came out, and while Grand Theft Auto 6 of course is going to come out, with the next generation coming in at either possibly late 2019 or sometime in 2020, it makes perfect sense why Deep Silver has just been acquired. It's very likely, with Saints Row's track record, that they're looking to reboot the franchise and possibly get a game on the next generation of hardware before Rockstar releases Grand Theft Auto 6, which will be this huge game that of course will eclipse what Saints Row does. Let's say hypothetically we're looking at a 2019 release for the PS5 and next generation Xbox, and they put a new Saints Row game out in early 2020, and maybe GTA 6 is slated for late 2020, it's very likely that Saints Row could recoup a lot of money in that time where there isn't a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 on the next generation of hardware. Of course, there will be backwards compatibility, but for the sake of what's available on the next generation of console and people looking for games to play on the next generation of hardware, it actually could make sense. We also have an announcement that Saints Row 3 is going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch, which is a very interesting decision, but it tells us a lot, even though the game is 7 years old. It might look like a very odd decision to put Saints Row 3 on the Nintendo Switch, but look at what they're doing with Saints Row. They're doing the same thing they've done since day one. They're putting their game that kind of compares to Grand Theft Auto, even though the story, in my opinion, is much stronger and much funnier, and there is a lot of freedom in its own right on a portable console where Grand Theft Auto isn't on, because there's no competition. That's literally what has made this series successful, is they're constantly avoiding competition where they can, or trying to diversify their game to go against the competition in other ways when there is competition. That's why they didn't just jump in with Saints Row 4 on the Nintendo Switch. They went with Saints Row 3 because the gameplay is more similar to GTA and people might be looking for a GTA clone. Had GTA 5 made a port onto Nintendo Switch, I wouldn't be surprised for them to go with the Saints Row 4 route because it looks bigger and it has all the flying and explosions and running up walls and stuff that you can't do in Grand Theft Auto. But in this case, right now, there isn't anything like that. So Saints Row 3 kind of makes sense. And at the same time, with the next generation of hardware coming out, it wouldn't be a surprise if Saints Row 5 might act as a soft reboot to the series, go back to its roots a little bit, and be more like Saints Row 2, have strong writing, but do something that might not blow Grand Theft Auto 6 out of the water, but hold players over until GTA 6 comes out. And these games are well done, they're great, they have some amazing stories and great stories and just some funny stuff that you can do. And while they often get compared to Grand Theft Auto, and I kind of did it in this video, you have to also look at how this game does fill a gap of entertainment, and it entertains players as they wait for other types of games and develop fans for a series specifically. I was more excited about Saints Row 3 and 4 than I ever was for Grand Theft Auto 5 because the games were still good at the core and they captured me in a unique way. So with the future of Saints Row, it's looking good that we might finally be seeing something new for the first time in a long time, which could be absolutely amazing. But let us know what you think. Would you buy a Saints Row 5 if it came out on the next generation of hardware? Let us know in the comments section down below. They might do crossplay and put it out on the old hardware too or something like that. But as far as like why they would release the game, it makes sense to try to capture the market on next gen hardware beforehand. If you like these types of videos though, let us know what you think and subscribe with notifications turned on, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video.